Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of State Champs eSports Atari 2600 edition. I am playing today the perhaps most infamous, notorious, most talked about, and perhaps little played Atari 2600 game of all time. And that is E.T. the Extra-Terrestrial for the Atari 2600. As you can see, it's not a great game. But that's okay, because today's episode is not about the gameplay. Today's episode is about the legacy of one of the most interesting video games of all time. Before I get started on the gameplay and some of the little trivia and tidbits that I have for y'all, let me just thank our sponsors, Lawrence Technological University. You can visit them at ltu.edu. Army, Michigan. And Hungry Howie's Pizza, famous for flavor. Okay. So as you can see, I am E.T. and I'm roaming around this area, and I've got to find little parts of E.T.'s radio to communicate back to his home planet, because E.T. must phone home. Now, I'm being pursued by a number of different people. There's FBI agents, I believe there's scientists, and what you have to do is find all of the pieces in these little, they look like pits to me. If there's something in the pit, then you levitate up, and most oftentimes get trapped in them because of the poor design of the game. This is why, one of the many reasons why this game is considered one of the, if not the worst games of all time. Alright, let's see if we can try this again. Come on, E.T. Oh. Because what happens is you're supposed to be exploring these pits, but you oftentimes wind up getting stuck in them instead, and you can't get out. Oh boy. Did a little test beforehand, and I was not doing this poorly. Let's see if I can... Now, to get out of the pit, because I had never played this game before, to really any significant amount of time, you have to hold the fire button down and then push up. That will... Fire button will elevate E.T.'s head and neck, and then up will... Oh, ooh, lordy. Alright, now what this scientist is doing is he's grabbed me, kidnapped poor E.T., and he's taking me back for research, and I've now escaped. These little dots, I believe, are supposed to be Reese's Pieces, and if you capture enough of them, it does something for you. Alright, now I just ran out of points or life, and that's little Elliot that comes to resuscitate you, because you guys are, E.T. and Elliot are linked. Alright, now here's a little flower, which is not part of your spaceship device, but it will, it is a flower like in the game that you can bring back to life with E.T.'s healing botanical skills. Okay, there we go. Let's go down. Let's go down. Now, as you can see, the main problem with this game is that it's fairly monotonous. It's go in one pit after another and try to find the pieces of the game. So it's not quite a puzzle game. I mean, it is a puzzle in the sense that you're trying to figure out where the pieces are hidden, but it doesn't really involve a lot of brain power. It's essentially almost random dumb luck of where you happen to find the pieces of the puzzle or of his machine to call home. And then you just pray that you don't get stuck in any pits. Now, most people probably know of E.T. as being the game that is kind of credited with crashing the video game industry. I think that's a little harsh. It did kill off Atari. Now, you could say Atari is the biggest home video game company at the time, so you're killing off Atari and you're killing off a major portion of the industry, because not only do you have Atari, but you've got all the third-party companies that create Atari video games like Activision and iMagic and Parker Brothers. But in my own humble opinion, E.T. was not the nail in the coffin. I think it was really the fact that video games at that time were really turning into just, very crass cash grabs. While there were a lot of great ones that we've been covering on this series, there's just as many bad ones. The most recent episode that we did was all about the Star Wars games, and there was technically three, but there would have been 4 Star Wars games in 1983, which is the year that E.T. was released. Actually, E.T. was released at the end of 82. Obviously, sales went through into 83. And so, as we discussed in that episode, all of those Star Wars games were pretty universally panned. And I'm sure Parker Brothers paid a pretty penny for the Star Wars rights. We know that Atari did. They paid, I believe it's upward nearly $20 million for the rights to E.T. And considering the game only sold 1.5 million copies or cartridges, you'd have to assume that that's a pretty big loss. As a matter of fact, I believe Atari lost $500 million in 83. I mean, that's a lot of money now. So back then, I could see where that would kill a company. Okay, let's see. Dang it. Alright. Frustrating, to say the least. Well, the story behind how E.T. was created was rather interesting. It was designed by Howard Scott Warshaw, who also in 1982 released or created Yar's Revenge and Raiders of the Lost Ark. So he was really working on 3 games simultaneously or in very short proximity to each other. The reason Spielberg wanted Warshaw on E.T. was because he had worked with him closely for the Raiders game. Now, apparently Spielberg wanted a game that was a little bit closer to Pac-Man, something just very action-oriented, very easy and quick and fun to play. Howard had already come up with this design for E.T., and shockingly, Spielberg was overruled. I guess while he had a lot of clout in the video game or in the movie making arena, he did not have as much clout in the video game world. Now, because Atari wanted to cash in on the popularity of E.T. in time for the big Christmas holiday, they only had about not even 2 months to make this game, and it shows. And Warshaw was paid handsomely for banging this game out. I believe it was $200,000 and a trip to Hawaii. I guess when you're paying $20 million for the rights to the game, well, what's another $200,000, right? There's our flower again. Now, even at the time, before the game had quote-unquote built this reputation of ruining the industry, the reviews for it were not good. So while it did sell a lot of copies and it was popular comparatively to other Atari games, like I said, it sold 1.5 million cartridges, which puts it, I believe, in 8th place as far as the biggest selling Atari 2600 games of all time, right between Demon Attack, which we've covered on the show, and Adventure, which is, I believe, the very first game to have an Easter egg in it. Now, just as a side note, there is a great documentary that you should check out called Atari Game Over. And so it's all about the kind of the death of Atari primarily in the home video market in the early 80s. Now you say death, that's really an overstatement. It's more really a wounding, because while Atari did go down in 83, 84, in 85 you had the first Nintendo, so it wasn't like it was a huge lull. It wasn't the dark ages of video games by any means. But in that documentary, one of the kind of the urban legends that had grown up around the E.T. game was that there were so many unsold cartridges, about 3 million to be exact, that all of those cartridges had been buried in an Arizona landfill. So the documentary kind of follows a crew of archaeologists, I guess you could call them, who went to the landfill and were able to actually find the cartridges. And yes, they were there. They were dumped, and I believe they also found, I think there was a lot of Pac-Man cartridges as well. That was the biggest selling game of all time, but I think they had anticipating selling a lot more copies. Regardless, Go check that movie out. I believe it's available on Amazon to view. Atari Game Over. Now, one of the other very interesting things about the game's designer, Howard Scott Warshaw, is that he was an incredibly talented designer, or I should say successful designer. I mentioned his other games, Yar's Revenge and Raiders of the Lost Ark. All three of those games sold over 1 million. ET, again, selling 1.5. And they're in the top 20 of the biggest selling Atari games. So, Atari 2600 games, let me specify. So the guy seemed to have a knack, or I'm not sure what it was, but he had that, definitely had that lightning in the bottle. He also did another Atari game called Saboteur, but it was never released. Apparently they tried putting it out, kind of rebranding it for a different game, and that didn't work either. Now you can, of course, find a bootleg version of it if you're really interested, and maybe what we'll do is we'll play that in a special episode coming up here. I'm just kind of going through my notes as I look at ET getting taken away. Now the designer, Mr. Warshaw, went on to a very interesting career. Like a lot of the early game designers, he did leave the video game industry. He wound up writing books and making documentaries, and was even a psychotherapist, of all things. So really, this game, even though like as weak as it was, there kind of the stories and everything around the game itself are far more interesting than the game. I kind of hesitated on playing this one for the stream just because, to be honest, I'm not a big fan of like bad things. You know, I'm not like one of those movie guys that likes the so bad they're good movies. I'd actually prefer, there's enough actually good creations in the world that I'd rather spend my time focusing on those. But you know, E.T. is kind of the elephant in the room when it comes to the list of biggest selling video games of all time. So, you know, I had to show it a little love and at least talk about it here. And I would keep playing, but as you can see, this is pretty much the extent of what you can do. Now, if you saw there, I was able to escape my captor by pressing the fire button, and I did get away. So yeah, once they grab you, it's not guaranteed that you're gonna be taken away, but most likely. Yeah, so as you can see, it's just more pits, more falling into nothing, and potentially getting trapped and trying to put this thing together. Like I said, I never played the game that often, so I wasn't able to assemble the little device that ET needs to phone home. But apparently, once you solve the game, it just repeats just in a little bit harder level or harder difficulty. So I guess that's it. We'll put a fork in this one. And I do thank everybody for watching. Now you've got a little piece of video game history, an important piece, I should say, of video game history. And again, I want to thank our sponsors, Lawrence Tech, Army, Michigan, and of course, Hungry Howie's Pizza. I'm Denver. This is State Champs eSports, Atari 2600 edition. Come back tomorrow and we'll be playing another retro classic game. Thanks. Bye-bye.